My name is Zane. I'm 63 years old. I built a business from nothing. I own property that stretches across 3 counties. I put my son through college, co-signed his first mortgage, and wired him money at 2 a.m. when his startup was drowning, without ever once asking for a thank you. I thought that was what good fathers did. Then one Tuesday night, at my own birthday dinner, my 16-year-old granddaughter looked me dead in the eyes, tilted her head with a teenage half-smile and said, "Grandpa Zane, are you even anybody?" The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then my son Zephyr laughed. His wife Zola hid her smile behind her wineglass. "And me?" I said nothing. I cut my birthday cake. I kissed my granddaughter Santhi on the forehead. I shook my son's hand. I drove home alone in the dark. But here's what they didn't know. That night at 11:47 p.m., I opened my laptop, not out of anger, out of something far more dangerous, clarity. And by sunrise the next morning, the knock on my door sounded very, very different. They forgot one thing, one crucial thing, whose name was still on everything. Stop right there. Before this story goes any further, subscribe, hit that bell. Drop in the comments if you've ever been underestimated by someone you love. Because what Zane does next is quiet, surgical, and absolutely devastating. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't scroll past without subscribing. Story starts now. I want to tell you something about silence. Most people think silence is empty, that if a man doesn't shout, doesn't slam doors, doesn't throw things, then nothing is happening inside him. Those people have never met a man like me. My name is Zane. I turned 63 that Tuesday in October. The leaves were doing that thing they do in the Northeast, burning orange and gold like the world is trying to look beautiful before it goes cold. I remember noticing that on the drive over to Zephyr's house. Ordered catering, the kind with linen ordered catering, the kind with linen napkins and little cards on each plate telling you what you're about to eat. There were candles on the table, not 63 of them obviously, 3. Someone had written Dad in blue frosting on the cake, slightly crooked on the left side. I noticed it was crooked. I didn't say anything. That's a habit of mine. Zephyr, my son, 38 years old, sharp suit, good jaw, got his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, was talking about his firm. A new acquisition, something about commercial real estate on the East Corridor. He was animated in the way men get when they're talking about money they believe is already theirs. Zola, his wife, nodded at everything he said with the practiced ease of a woman who has attended 1,000 of these performances. Neither of them asked me a single question the entire evening. Not one. I sat at the head of the table. They'd given me the head of the table at least. And I ate my catered food, and I listened to my son describe a world I partly built for him. And I thought about how strange it is when your children stop being curious about you. There's a moment in every parent's life when the conversation flips, when they stop asking you things and start telling you things. I always expected that. I prepared for it. What I didn't prepare for was being erased entirely. Xanthi was on her phone under the table. 16, beautiful, terrifyingly sharp. She got Zola's cheekbones, and I was beginning to understand some of Zola's instincts. She had barely looked up since appetizers. Then, somewhere between the main course and the cake, she looked up. She looked directly at me, the way teenagers look at old furniture, assessing whether it's worth keeping or just taking up space. And she said it with a little smile that wasn't unkind, which somehow made it worse. "Grandpa Zane, what do you even do anymore? Like, are you anybody? The table went quiet. Zephyr let out a short laugh. That reflex laugh people do when they're uncomfortable, but also, somewhere underneath, not entirely disagreeing. Dad, she doesn't mean it, he said. But he was already looking back at Zola, already past it, already gone. Zola took a slow sip of wine. The corner of her mouth moved in a way I was supposed to miss. I didn't miss it. I sat with those words, "Are you anybody?" And I did not react. I smiled at Xanthi. I said, "Nobody important, sweetheart." I cut my cake. I made small talk. I said goodnight to everyone with the same warmth I always had. And then I drove home in the dark, alone, watching those burning orange leaves disappear in my rearview mirror. At 11:47 p.m., I sat down at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened a new document and I began to write a list. Not of grievances, not of names to blame, just a list of facts. Numbers, addresses, legal titles, dates of transactions. The bones of a life that someone had apparently forgotten I was still living. I was not angry. I was precise. And precision, I have learned over 63 years, is so much more permanent than anger. Let me tell you about Wales. Wales has been my attorney for 19 years. He's 67, retires twice a year and comes back both times, drinks his coffee black and speaks in the kind of measured sentences that make juries lean forward. He knew my wife before she passed. He's witnessed every major document of my adult life. The business filings, the property transfers, the will, the amendments to the will. He is the only person on earth who knows the full architecture of what I've built. I called him at 8:04 the next morning. "Wells," I said, "I need to make some changes." There was a pause, the pause of a man who has learned that when I call early, it matters. "What kind of changes, Zane?" "The quiet kind," I said. "I'll come back to what happened in that call. But first, I need to tell you what was on that list I made at midnight, because the list is important. The list is the whole story. In 40 years of working, saving, and building, here is what I had accumulated. 4 residential properties, including the house Zephyr grew up in, which I still technically own. 2 commercial lots, one of which sits at the corner of Elm and Westing Street in a neighborhood that has, in the last 3 years, become very valuable. A business I sold in 2019 for more than any of my children know. And a portfolio of investments managed quietly, modestly, in an account that has Ren, my daughter, Zephyr's younger sister, listed as the secondary contact because Ren is the one who calls every Sunday. Zephyr is listed as co-beneficiary on my estate. He lives in a house where I co-signed the mortgage 6 years ago when his bank said no and he called me at 11 p.m. and I said yes without asking what it was for. His firm received $180,000 from me in 2018. He called it a loan. I called it a gift. I never once asked for it back. I wrote all of this down, not to feel powerful, to feel accurate, to remind myself on a night when my own family had made me feel invisible, exactly what visible looked like from the outside. Then Wells told me something. He told me almost as an afterthought, the way he delivers the most important information, tucked inside a sentence, quiet as a footnote. "You know, Zola called me about 2 months ago." I stopped writing. "About what?" I asked. "General questions," she said. "About estate structures, timelines." A pause. "She asked about your health, Zane. Whether I had any updated information about your outlook." I set my pen down on the table. The kitchen was very still. Here is what I understood in that moment, with the cold clarity of a man who has been underestimated one too many times. The birthday dinner wasn't an accident. Xanthi's words, "Are you anybody?" weren't just a teenager's careless cruelty. The laughter, Zola's smile, the way Zephyr had looked straight through me all evening. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was a temperature, a household temperature that had been slowly, deliberately set. And someone had been adjusting the thermostat. Zola had called my attorney. She had asked about my health, about timelines. She had looked at my life and started measuring it for its ending before it was anywhere near over. I picked my pen back up, and I added one more item to the list. Not a property, not a number, a name. I told Wells I would call him back with specific instructions. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the morning light move across the floor tiles. The same tiles I'd chosen 30 years ago, in a house built by my own two hands. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Ren. "I need you to go back with me." 3 months before that birthday dinner, before the cake with the crooked frosting, before Xanthi's words, before Zola's wineglass smile, I had a routine cardiology appointment. Nothing dramatic. A medication review. The kind of appointment a man my age keeps the way he keeps his car serviced. Not because anything is wrong, but because he is smart enough to know that ignoring small things creates large problems. The doctor adjusted one prescription, told me to reduce sodium, said the word monitoring in the casual tone medical professionals use when they want to sound thorough without alarming you. I wasn't alarmed. Zephyr drove me that day. He sat in the waiting room while I was inside. He heard the nurse call my name. He heard the door close. And somewhere in the 45 minutes I was in that office, something shifted in his wife's mind. Because Zephyr, I now understand, came home that evening and told Zola about the appointment, about the word monitoring. That was all Zola needed. Wells had been careful with me. Attorneys are trained to deliver information without editorializing. But between what he told me and what he didn't say, I was able to piece together the shape of things. Zola had visited a financial planner, not their shared one, a separate one, a discrete one. She had asked questions about inherited property, about the legal process of title transfer when an estate owner passes, about timelines. She had also, and this is the part that sat in my chest like a stone, spoken to a realtor, a commercial realtor, about a specific property, the corner of Elm and Westing Street, my corner of Elm and Westing Street. She had not mentioned that it wasn't hers yet. Now I want to be precise here, because I am not a man who accuses without evidence, and I am not telling you Zola is a villain in the way movies have villains, cold-blooded and cartoonish. What I'm telling you is that Zola is a strategic woman who looked at my age, heard the word monitoring, and began quietly building a future that assumed I would not be a significant presence in it. She hadn't wished me dead. She had simply decided I was already leaving, and she had started moving furniture before the house was even empty. The birthday dinner made sense now in a way that turned my stomach. The catered food, the 3 candles, the way neither of them asked me a single question all evening. It wasn't disrespect born from busyness. It was the specific disregard you extend to someone you have already, in your mind, written a past tense around. Zephyr, my son. My boy who used to fall asleep on my chest watching baseball. Had he known? Had he been part of it? That question almost broke me. Sitting in my kitchen, the morning light long gone now, and afternoon pressing flat against the windows. That question was the one I couldn't put on the list because it didn't have a clean answer yet. But here's the turn I didn't see coming. The one that shifted everything. When I called Ren, she didn't answer immediately. She called back 12 minutes later, slightly breathless, and before I could say anything, she said, "Dad, I was just about to call you. Something's wrong, and I think you already know." She told me that Xanthi, my granddaughter, 16 and sharp and guilty in the way kids are when they've overheard something they shouldn't have, had sent Ren a message 3 days before the birthday dinner. A strange message. "Aunt Ren, is Grandpa Zane sick? Mom keeps saying he won't be around much longer." The room went very still inside me. Xanthi hadn't called me a nobody out of cruelty. She'd called me a nobody because her mother had been quietly, consistently teaching her that I was already gone. My granddaughter wasn't being mean. She was grieving someone who was still sitting right in front of her. And that was the thing that finally made my eyes burn. Let me tell you about Ren. She's 38 years old. She lives in Poland with her partner, runs a small but respected architecture firm, and calls me every single Sunday at 4 p.m. without fail. Not because I asked her to, not because it's scheduled, because she decided somewhere in her 20s that her father was worth the consistency. She is not perfect. We have disagreed loudly on politics, on her choices, on mine. There was a period in her early 30s when we barely spoke, and that distance was partly my fault. I was a man of my generation, meaning I expressed love through provision rather than presence, and Ren needed presence. We found our way back. That matters here, because Ren found her way back to me, and now, when it counted most, she came back again. I told her everything that afternoon, the birthday dinner, Xanthi's words, Zephyr's laugh, Zola's smile and Zola's phone calls, and Zola's quiet real estate inquiries. All of it. I told her the way you tell someone when you're not performing pain but simply laying it down, piece by piece, because you're tired of carrying it alone. Ren listened the way her mother used to listen, completely, without interrupting, without rehearsing her response while I was still speaking. When I finished, there was a silence. Then she said, "Dad, do you know what's on the Elm and Westing Street property listing right now?" I said I knew the property. I said it was mine. What was she asking? "Zephyr sent a business prospectus to his investors last month," she said carefully. "He sent it to Aunt Margot by mistake. She forwarded it to me because she didn't know what to do with it and she was scared to call you." I waited. "Dad, in that prospectus, the Elm Street property is listed as a current company asset, not a future acquisition, not a pending transfer, a current asset. His investors believe it already belongs to the firm." I sat very still. "He told them it was his. He told them," Ren said quietly, "that it was already in the process of being transferred, that it was effectively theirs to build on." There it was. Not a miscommunication, not an oversight. My son, my boy, my 38-year-old son in his sharp suit talking about acquisitions over catered food, had taken my name, my land, my equity, and used it as the foundation of a deal he had never once asked me about. He had assumed. That is the only word for it. He had assumed that I was transitioning, that I was fading, that the question of the property was only a matter of paperwork and time, and that the paperwork was basically his to begin. He had treated my life like a transaction that was already closing. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, the wind had picked up and I could hear the oak tree in the backyard, the one I planted the year Zephyr was born, moving against the side of the house. "Dad," Ren said, "are you okay?" "I'm precise," I told her. She understood what that meant. We talked for 2 more hours. Not about revenge. I want to be careful about that word, because what Ren and I built together in that conversation was not revenge. Revenge is impulsive and hot. What we built was something architectural, her word, and she would know. We built a correction, a quiet, exact, irrefutable correction to a story that had been told about me without my permission. I called Wells for the second time that evening. This time, I didn't say I need to make some changes. This time I said, "Wells, I need to make some moves." He said, "I've been waiting for this call." I almost smiled. I asked him one question before we got to business. One question that had been sitting in the back of my throat all day, heavy and unswallowed. "Wells, do you think Zephyr knew about Zola's calls to you?" A long pause. "Zane," he said finally, "I think your son is a man who chose not to look too closely at the plan his wife built, because the plan benefited him, and looking closely would have required a difficult conversation." I nodded at the phone. "That's not the same as knowing," I said. "No," Wells agreed, "but it's not innocent either." I wrote that down on my list too, not as a charge, as a context, because what I was about to do wasn't punishment. It was a mirror. And sometimes the most devastating thing you can give a person is simply an honest reflection of exactly what they've done. By morning, they would all be looking in it. I want to describe that Tuesday morning carefully, because I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I want you to understand the feeling I woke up with. Not electricity, not triumph, not the hot satisfaction of a man who has been wronged and is finally swinging back. Peace. That is the only honest word for it. I woke at 5:43 a.m. without an alarm, the way I have woken my entire adult life. Made coffee, stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky go from black to the specific shade of blue-gray that exists only in that first honest minute before sunrise fully commits. The oak tree in the backyard was still. The neighborhood was still. I had already sent Wells everything he needed the night before. Now I just waited, and I drank my coffee, and I was still. At 7:14 a.m., Wells hand-delivered a formal legal document to Zephyr's firm. I want to be precise about what that document was, and what it wasn't, because I know what you might be imagining, and the reality is both quieter and more devastating than that. It was not a lawsuit, it was not a threat, it was a clarification. A single clean, meticulously worded clarification that the Elm and Westing Street property was held within a newly established trust, managed by Wells and co-administered by Wren, and was therefore not available under any legal interpretation as a current or pending asset for any third-party business agreement. That was it. No anger in the language, no names called, no accusations printed in bold. Just the truth, stated plainly, delivered to the people who needed to read it. But Wells, efficient, thorough, 19-year Wells, was legally obligated to copy all relevant parties to that notice, which meant Zephyr's investors received it simultaneously, which meant that by the time Zephyr walked into his office that morning, his partners had already read it, had already started making calls, had already begun asking questions that Zephyr had no clean answers to. At 8:30 a.m., the call started. At 9:15 a.m., the deal collapsed. I know this not because I was watching, I was still sitting in my kitchen on my second cup of coffee reading, but because Wells called me at 9:22 to confirm, and his voice had that particular quality it gets when he is professionally satisfied. It's done, Zane, he said simply. Thank you, Wells, I said. I hung up. I turned the page of my book. Outside, that oak tree was moving now, slow and easy in the morning wind. Then the phone calls started coming to me. Zephyr called at 10:04. I looked at the screen. I set it face down. He called again at 10:17, then 10:31, then 10:45, each call a little more desperate in its frequency, the digital equivalent of a man knocking harder and harder on a door he assumed would always open. Zola called at 10:52, twice. I let it ring both times. I want to stop here and tell you something true about that hour. Sitting in my kitchen, listening to my phone light up and choosing again and again silence. It would be easy to make that sound powerful, cinematic. The wrong patriarch finally holding the cards. But honestly, it just felt sad. Not weak, not regretful. Just the specific sadness of a man who loves his son and has watched his son choose comfort over character for long enough that correction became unavoidable. I was not enjoying this. I was enduring it, because some necessary things are not enjoyable. At 11:47 a.m., exactly 12 hours after I had opened my laptop and started my list, the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was before I reached the door. I looked through the peephole anyway. Old habit. Zephyr, Zola. Standing on my porch in the middle of a Tuesday, both of them dressed like they'd left the house in a hurry, which they had. Zephyr's face was the color of old paper. Zola stood slightly behind him, which I noticed because Zola never stands behind anyone. Then I saw Xanthi. She was at the back of the small group, arms crossed over her chest, holding herself with that particular teenage stillness that means the body is trying to disappear. She had clearly been crying. Her eyes were puffy and red, and she was staring at the welcome mat like it owed her an apology. I opened the door. I did not say anything. I simply looked at my son. Zephyr opened his mouth once, closed it, tried again. Dad, I'm so sorry. His voice cracked on the last word. Not performed, cracked the way voices crack when shame and genuine grief meet in the same sentence, and neither one will yield to the other. I looked at Zola. She met my eyes for the first time, and what I realized, standing there, had probably been years. Really met them. Zane, she said. Just my name. But the way she said it, that was a whole confession. Then Xanthi looked up from the welcome mat. Grandpa Zane, she said, and her voice was very small. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't understand. I'm really, really sorry. She was 16 years old and she was standing on my porch, taking responsibility for something she had only half created, in the way children absorb the values of their households and perform them without knowing that's what they're doing. I looked at my granddaughter for a long moment, then I stepped back from the door. Come in, I said. I'll make coffee. I'm going to tell you what I kept and what I gave back. The Elm Street property, I kept it. Still in the trust, still under Wells and Wren. Zephyr can apply to develop it properly, transparently, with a real conversation and a real agreement between two people who respect each other. He knows that now. The door is open. It just requires him to knock like a man instead of walking through like an heir. The house I co-signed untouched. I would never take the roof from over Xanthi's head. Not for anything. The $180,000, still forgiven. Some debts were never really about money. What I gave back was harder than any of that. 2 days after the door, after the coffee, after Zola sat at my kitchen table and said things that I will keep between the two of us, because some conversations are not for an audience. 2 days after all of that, it was just Zephyr and me. No Zola, no Xanthi, no Wells. Just my son sitting across from me at the same table where I'd made my list. Both of us with coffee going cold between our hands. And he cried. I hadn't seen my son cry since the day we buried his mother. He is a man who carries his feelings the way I taught him. Inward, compressed, useful. That day he couldn't compress it. It came out of him in the ragged, graceless way real grief does. And I sat across from him, and I did not look away. I didn't know she called Wells, he said. I know. I wouldn't have let her. Dad, I wouldn't have laughed if I'd understood what was actually. I know, son. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I let the silence hold for a moment. Then I said the thing I had decided somewhere between midnight and sunrise on that Tuesday. I was going to say if we ever got here. Zephyr, I don't need you to be sorry. I need you to be present. Those are different things. He looked up. I'm still here, I said. I'm not monitoring. I'm not fading. I'm not past tense. I am your father, and I'm 63 years old, and I have 30 good years left in me if I stay off sodium and keep my cardiology appointments. So I need you to look at me like that's true. He nodded. He couldn't speak, he nodded. We didn't resolve everything that morning. Families don't, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Zola and I have a long, slow road. There are conversations between her and Zephyr that are not mine to be part of. Trust is not rebuilt over coffee. I know that. But here is what I didn't expect. 6 months later, Xanthi called me on a Sunday, Ren's day, which felt right somehow, and asked if she could come over. She arrived with a voice recorder and a spiral notebook, very serious, very 16 and a half, and told me she had a school project on legacy. She wanted to interview me. She wanted to know what I had built, not the properties, not the business. Me, what I believed in, how I had failed, what I would do differently, what I was proud of. We talked for 3 hours. At the end, she clicked off the recorder, looked down at her notebook, and said quietly, not performing it, just saying it the way you say something true. Grandpa Zane, I think you might be the most important person I know. I look at this girl, this sharp, complicated, inheriting the world girl who 6 months ago had asked me if I was anybody. That's all I ever was, sweetheart, I told her. My name is Zane. I am 63 years old. I built everything around me with patience, precision, and a love that sometimes looked like silence because I didn't yet know how to make it louder. I am learning. And my name is still on everything that matters. That's Zane's story. And if it moved you, if you saw yourself in him or in Zephyr or even in Xanthi trying to find her way back, then this story did exactly what it was meant to do. Drop a comment below telling me which chapter hit hardest. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet people carry the loudest power. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Real, raw, human stories about dignity, family, and what it means to refuse to disappear. Like this video, hit that bell. Because the next story is already waiting. And just like Zane, it has been very, very patient.